This is the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex in North Texas. There are over 50 movie theaters in the entire Metroplex, but only 9 of them are art houses, and all 9 of those are in Dallas. The only art house option in Fort Worth is at the Modern Art Museum, but their screenings are only on the weekends. This is Jimmy Sweeney, who wants to change all of that. Here in Fort Worth's Foundry District, he and his wife Brooke are currently building what will become the city's only art house, the Granbury Theater. I had a chance to sit down with him recently and talk about the economics of art house theaters, his experience starting one, and the future of theaters in the age of streaming services. So let's start with Fort Worth. Why Fort Worth, and also why this specific spot in Fort Worth?
Yeah, so I went to TCU, graduated in 2015, and in my time out here in Fort Worth, one, I just fell in love with the city, but two, a lot of the movies that I wanted to see or had grown up seeing back in Florida just weren't available anywhere around here. And I figured that there's no way in the 15th largest city in the United States that there are not people that want to see independent film.
But there aren't any art house, surely there have been in Fort Worth. I feel like I should know that.
So the last one that really specialized as an art house was the Ridgely Theater, and it closed, or it stopped showing independent film in like the late 80s.
It's been that long since?
Yeah.
Because I know the, the Modern?
Yeah, so the Modern on weekends.
But it's just on weekends, you can't hardly count it, right?
Right, exactly. It's like if you don't have time that weekend, then you miss out on it.
But it's really been since the late 80s, since there's been a standalone specific art house theater in Fort Worth?
Yeah, as far as the research I've done, it's been 30 years.
For as many as Dallas has. Dallas has what? If you count the Alamo, it'd be 5 or 6,
yeah, 5
right?
or 6.
You got the 2 Angelicas, the Magnolia, the other Landmark, Texas Theater.
Yeah.
And if you count the Alamo Draft Houses, that's another 3 or 4.
Yeah.
That's surprising that Fort Worth doesn't have its own. That's weird.
Yeah, well, especially since Fort Worth has always had this culture around art. With world-class museums, with the Modern, the Kimball, the Amon G. Carter, Bass Hall, it has always been a place where art has been welcomed, and there's been this artistic community here.
Yeah.
But that extension into film just hasn't really happened. And so there's a lot of people in the city doing a lot to make Fort Worth a more film-friendly place.
We have movies that are shot here.
Yeah,
Recent movies too.
Yeah, The Old Man and the Gun shot a lot here. A24's Never Going Back last year shot a lot around here.
It was almost entirely shot around here. Right?
Yeah. And Nowhere in the Area picked it up for even a day or 2.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's weird.
And so we really just want to get to, it was the perfect place for us to get to display what's already happening in the city that people don't know about.
Yeah. So why this spot? Obviously you're close to West 7th. This is, this is pretty much where the culture of the town is, but.
For sure, yeah. So this area is called the Foundry District, and one thing we love about the Foundry is just all of the public art that they have with the murals in Inspiration Alley. Almost every building around here is painted with some sort of mural that you could just spend hours walking around and spending time in here.
Yeah.
And so we felt that our values for the theater and just getting to be a place of artistic exhibition really aligned with that. And the community that's coming and hanging out around here just fit perfectly with what we wanted to do.
Yeah. Okay, so I don't know the first thing about running a theater, starting a theater.
For sure.
So you have this idea. First off, how long has this whole process been? It's been about a year or so since you guys started?
Yeah, about 9 months ago is when I quit my job to do this full time. The idea for the theater has been around since probably 2015, 2016. One of the producers for Moonlight went to the same high school that I did. She was 5 or 6 years older, but I was in the middle school at the time she was at the school. And so it was this buzz of hey, like, you got to go see Moonlight. And it wasn't until after the Oscars that a theater around here picked it up. And so that's where
I guess that's right.
one of the best movies of the century so far.
Yeah.
And so that's where the idea really birthed, was like, I cannot be the only person that cares about what great movies are coming out right now.
Yeah.
So you have this idea. Where do you even start? Like, where do you go from there? Like, is it about location, permits? I mean, like, take me through like the first like 3 to 6 months of this whole process.
For sure. I went to my trusty friend Google and Googled how.
Everybody's best friend.
Exactly, and Googled how to run a movie theater. That, like, 100%. Like, I have no idea how this works. I've popped popcorn before. I've sold movie tickets before.
Right.
I worked in a theater for 2 days and then quit because I hated it. So that's as much experience as I have.
Exactly. I've like volunteered at a local film festival growing up, and I'd say that showing people that that's where the movie is about as far as I had gotten. And so I just got linked up with a couple of theaters that were really helpful in sharing parts of their business plan and just what goes into starting a theater from the ground up.
Yeah.
And so that was step one.
What were those things that they told you, like that?
A lot of it was about building relationships with film distributors, how to get movies, how to then, like, what are the right ways to project movies, how do you make people feel comfortable in getting out of their living room to come to what's essentially our living room, you know?
Yeah.
And so those were the biggest things of, like, how do you get movies and how do you pay the distributors so that you can continue to get movies?
Yeah.
Well, let's start there actually, because there's a lot in there I want to try and unpack. This is one of those things. I feel like I should know this, and yet I don't. How do you get them? Like, how do you get a DCP? Are you talking to, like, the studio themselves, or is there like a middleman distributor? Like, how does that process work?
Yeah, so the producers, studios sell their movies to a distributor. There are some studios that do both, like Disney, Annapurna does production and distribution, and some, like, Magnolia does some also. So they have their booking agents, or whatever title they want to call them within the company.
Right.
And so you reach out to them, give them, hey, I want to run this movie from this date to this date, and then they either say yes or no, and then they send you the movie either through, they either send you a DCP, or for us, what a lot of smaller art houses will do is there's a program that they can distribute through that allows DCPs to be projected on non-DCP projectors. And so it's distributed online digitally. And that's where a lot of the industry has gone, is where they can just distribute to you digitally now.
Interesting. So how does that work financially? Like, you're basically renting a movie, like, not like Blockbuster, but it's not entirely different. So, like, are you paying like one, like, flat fee for 2 or 3 weeks, or how does that work?
Yeah, most of the time what it'll be is you'll pay an upfront fee that is like a deposit, I guess, and then you will pay them a certain percentage versus your ticket sales if it exceeds that deposit. The deposits most of the time are not a ton, $200 to $300, maybe $500. I would say, I don't know personally for, like, if a Black Panther or something like that comes out, Disney probably has a higher deposit than most smaller distributors.
Okay, so you wouldn't pay like the same rate for Avengers that you would like First Reformed or something?
No.
Okay, they go up and down.
Yeah,
okay.
So for like a superhero movie, what the distributor will tell to the theater is most likely for the first 3 to 4 weeks, it'll be 90% of ticket sales versus the upfront fee. And it has to be playing on their biggest screen or biggest auditorium. And then the theater gets a little bit of flexibility after that to move it around. But with your smaller movies, they still have, some power of saying that depending on who's involved, but for the most part, it'll be significantly cheaper for the theater, and you have flexibility to say to them, hey, I want to run from this time to this time,
right,
and they will just rent it to you for that long.
Okay. Is there any haggling that goes on?
There can be. I obviously, since we haven't opened yet, I'm not necessarily to that point where I've been working with them long enough to haggle,
right.
But I have been told that there can be plenty of haggling involved.
Well, let's go back to more talking about, the location and the whole idea of building the theater. And I guess I'm asking this of you as just as much of an audience member as you are a businessman.
Yeah.
But I imagine most businesses start with somebody looking at what someone else is doing and thinking, okay, that's cool, but I know how to do that so much better.
Yeah.
And I don't want to put words in your mouth.
No.
This is obviously an assumption, but was there any element of that? Like, were you, going to multiplexes and other art houses and thinking, this is great, but here's how we can do it better? Was there any element of that?
Yeah, there was some. I grew up in Sarasota, Florida, and there was a great theater there called Burns Court Cinema, and they were 3 or 4 screens, and that's where I got to experience like Slumdog Millionaire with a discussion afterwards, and that's just like where I got to really enjoy film,
right,
more so than going to AMC. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I love seeing superhero movies, but the passion for film came from going to that other theater.
It's a different vibe.
It is.
Yeah.
It totally is. And the only thing that I did not like about it was that a lot of the people that went there dressed up. And so it felt a little too fancy to me,
Okay.
Which I already feel like film can be something where if you're not part of it, it can seem like an intimidating thing to walk into. Just in terms of like, somebody says that this movie is bad because of the cinematography or the dialogue. If you're not a film person, you look at a movie completely differently.
There's a lot of pretentious folk.
Yeah,
I'm one of them, to be honest.
Yeah, that's the easiest way to say it.
Right, yeah.
And so I felt like there's.
I just did a video about cinema. I'm editing a video about cinematography right now. So.
Of course.
Sorry, keep going.
No, so that's. I already saw that there's sort of like that barrier to people feeling comfortable branching out from superhero movies,
Yeah.
And so that's something that I thought that we could do better, not even necessarily better, but differently, is try and create a very safe, communal, comfortable environment to where you can come in and just get to experience film in a way where you are learning more about it, and sort of developing that palate the same way that you would develop a food or coffee palate. Developing that towards film in a way where it didn't feel like, I'm dressed up for the theater and I've got to go in and know what I'm doing.
Kind of like a middle ground between like the fast food factor of multiplexes
Yes.
and then like Broadway.
Yeah, exactly.
Like the best experience I had, the best theater going experience I had in 2018 was the Texas Theater did a 35 mil screening of Dazed and Confused.
Yeah.
And they had this keg party along with it, and like it was this packed house, and everybody's quoting the lines, and it was that communal aspect that. Yeah, I don't know. You tend to. I don't know why you lose that at a multiplex, but for some reason you do. It's to be hoity-toity about it, like it's more sterile.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of that is the difference between a few thousand people walking in every day and a few hundred. And so just being able to have staff recognize people that are coming back regularly, or just having that smaller, intimate environment instead of, grabbing your ticket and telling you that Theater 2 is all the way down and then take a right,
Yeah, definitely.
Getting everybody involved and giving them ownership almost in what's going on.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go back here to this theater specifically. Where did you, or how did you guys find this place, and what has it been like, just developing? Obviously, it's not done yet, but take me through that process.
Yeah, so we my wife and I have come to the Foundry a lot, whether it's just to look at the murals or a lot of the parties that they will do out on their rock lawn over there, and just the businesses around here. And so we knew the vibe, we knew the aesthetic of it, and we thought, man, like that could be the perfect place for us. And then in approaching the landlords and just getting to hear what their vision for the area is, we had looked at a few other spots and it was sort of like, the ceiling's not high enough, or I don't really know like how we fit in here.
You gotta have like a really specific model of a building.
It has to be a very specific space. And the moment they walked us in here, I was like, yes, like this is perfect.
Right. And this is, you were saying before, this is a small theater. It's like 50 seats.
Yeah.
It's not a big, massive screen, but it's,
right.
It's a homey kind of vibe.
Exactly. It totally fit the amount of space we were looking for, high ceilings, great community of businesses around here that have similar visions. And so that's, as soon as I walked in, I was like, yes, like I am very confident that this would be the perfect spot for us. Awesome. And so from there, it goes to, you have to have an architect draw up plans. And then once those plans are done, you submit them to the city so that they can review everything and take a really long time doing it.
Yeah. How was that?
It was frustrating. That's probably the easiest way to say it. It took it from when our architects started drawing plans to when the city approved them was a little over 6 months.
What are they doing at that time?
For a 2,400 square foot space.
Yeah.
And so obviously there's a ton of development going on in Fort Worth now. I know that they have a lot going on up there that they're going through. But I'm sure that there is some efficiency loss somewhere in the process there, to put it politically correctly. And so it's basically just like a waiting game, because you can't really start building until you have your permits, and so you just have to wait it out. It's definitely a great exercise in patience and understanding that you can only control what you can control, and you can't worry about what you can't. Because if you spend all day pulling your hair out about somebody that you don't know, reading through something that you don't really understand, there's just no fruit in that for you, and you're just gonna end up frustrated. And so it took a lot of just stepping back and saying, okay, what are the things I can be doing today, this week, this month, these next couple months that I can actually control, so that when we do get our plans approved and everything, that we're just ready to hit the ground running.
Yeah. So would you say that's been the biggest hurdle of this whole process, is just dealing with the city and waiting for them to approve everything, or have there been other things?
I would say that that's been the biggest so far, just because there is nothing that you can do about it. You're only going to make people more frustrated if you're nagging at them. Like, hey, when are you gonna get this done? When are you gonna get this done? And there's some healthiness in that of, making sure that the people that have told you that they're accountable to you are actually continuing doing what they're doing. But you don't have a lot of power in that position. And so that has been the biggest hurdle, just in that I have no ability to do anything about it. Other hurdles are just like getting the foot in the door with some of the distributors. For films. Just because it's like, they don't know you.
Is there is it just as simple as sending an email, or is it an application process?
Yeah, there are some where, if you go into the Criterion collection and stuff like that, they just have, fill out this form, and it sends an automatic email to whoever, and then somebody gets back to you. But there's been some, once I introduce myself to one, they'll copy me on an email for a couple other people for introductions, because A24, Magnolia, they just on their website don't have any real contact information. It's just like booking at magnoliapictures.com.
Yeah.
So has been challenging in some ways, but a lot of it just has come through, oh, hey, I know somebody over there, let me copy you on an email to them so that you can get started knowing them.
Is there any kind of, well, let me combine two questions. First off, like, has there been any resistance from the city or from whoever during this whole process? And then secondly, well, let's just take that one first off. Just has there been any resistance throughout this whole process?
Not that I have encountered yet. I'm sure that there will, with some more exclusive films, there can be like bidding wars that happen.
Give me an example. Like,
So for Netflix's like limited release of Roma, they had very specific qualifications on what theaters they would put that into.
do you know what those are? 'Cause I know that it's in. I know that like there are theater chains that aren't showing it, and only certain are. But
Yeah, I don't know all of the specifics. Just by like word of mouth, I've gotten to hear a couple things on like what sort of sound system you had to have, which even that in and of itself disqualified a lot of smaller theaters because they were looking for the highest grade of Dolby, like 7:1 surround sound. That's just like the word of mouth of what I've heard about it.
Yeah.
And so it becomes very exclusive, and then the theaters that can qualify for it, realistically, they're whatever Netflix's distribution strategy is. I don't think anybody outside of whatever room that is decided in really knows what they're thinking. But like they're very mysterious about it.
Yeah, they don't release box office numbers.
No, at all.
They're weird.
Yeah, and so they only put it in one theater in Dallas. Realistically, I would imagine that the Magnolia and the Angelica probably went through some sort of bidding war to get it. I don't know that for sure, but I would imagine that those are the two theaters in Dallas that would have like met Netflix's standards, and then they probably had to go to battle a little bit to try and get to screen it. Okay. So there will be some of that. For us, there could be some resistance of like, hey, I know that you're not Dallas, but we are showing it in Dallas, and so we're gonna say that takes up our region.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, I had one distributor suggest that to me, but I don't think that we're going to see it that much, especially if we can turn in good box office numbers.
It's all about the money.
Exactly. If we can get our foot in the door in one or two of those situations and show them results, then I'm sure after that initial hurdle, it'll be like, yeah, whatever, I'm not concerned about you guys.
Right.
Yeah.
That's interesting it makes sense that they would look at, they wouldn't separate Dallas and Fort Worth as two separate markets,
Right.
even though they are.
Yeah, and I think that's just sort of, outside of DFW, I would say that there's probably limited understanding of, Dallas has a couple million people. Oh, Fort Worth has almost a million people.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
who would have thought?
Exactly. Surprise, surprise.
Yeah.
Oh, Fort Worth people don't want to drive an hour over to Dallas to go see a movie. Like, big shocker.
I mean, again, you can be as specific as you want to be here, and you don't have to answer it if you don't feel comfortable. But I'd be curious to know what the basic business model of your theater looks like. I mean,
sure.
I think a lot of people are aware that theaters tend to make more of their revenue from concessions rather than ticket sales. And, this may be a little bit tough to answer since you guys aren't open yet, but do you kind of have a basic idea of how that's going to look like and where the majority of your revenue is going to come from? Is it going to be split pretty evenly, or is it going to be weighed one side?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a traditional movie theater model definitely weighs heavily on concessions, which that will drive a lot for us, especially alcohol sales.
So you guys are going to have alcohol?
Yes.
That's the great thing about art house theaters is you
Yeah.
can buy a beer while you're watching a
Exactly.
movie. It makes the experience so much better.
It does. One or two or three, however many you want. Come hang out afterwards.
Right.
But for a lot of those bigger theaters, when they're having to pay studios 90% of their box office for
Is it that high?
I
didn't know it was that high.
that's what I've heard for Black Panther and Star Wars.
Is that may just be a Disney thing though, because I've heard that Disney charges potentially
Yeah.
higher than others.
They do. I would imagine they do, but I would imagine that Universal and a lot of those other major production companies are charging somewhere in the 60 to 90% range, especially for the first few weeks. Once
that changes.
it can change, especially depending on how the film is doing, and it'll change like what screen they're able to show it on in their multiplex.
Okay, so it's all variable then. That's
Yeah, it can be very, very variable. But for us, so for certain movies that like I've reached out to now, it's been somewhere in like the 35 to 50% range for box office sales. And so that's an extra 40 to 65% that a smaller theater playing smaller movies is able to keep versus giving up 90% of your box office, because I mean that's barely covering your labor at that point.
Yeah, right,
And so I think for us it'll be split a lot more evenly between box office and concessions than it is for a traditional multiplex. And then also space rentals, giving up the space for a couple nights or afternoons a week, finding ways that we can be creative with that will definitely be something that will drive a lot of more so our like extra discretionary funding to go out and maybe splurge a little bit on special event movies and stuff like that.
Okay. What do you mean by like those additional things? Are you talking like renting it out to businesses for conferences and stuff like that, or?
Yeah, so renting out to businesses, parties. That's been one of the really cool things so far is the amount of inquiry we have gotten about when is the space opening so that I can rent it out for my event. I think that I think we could very easily, if we let ourselves, become an event rental space. And so that'll be something that we have to feel out at the beginning is how do we use those opportunities to keep us going, especially at the start, versus losing our identity as a movie theater and just being an event space.
Yeah, with a nice screen and projector and everything.
Exactly.
Yeah. That makes sense. So again, feel free to be as specific or non-specific
Yeah.
as possible. I'm just curious, and obviously right now your expenses are obviously about building this place up, but 6 months or a year from now when you guys are open and operating, what does a month look like? What are your biggest expenses?
Biggest is obviously rent. But outside of that, there's really not a ton of overhead outside of rent and labor and film licensing.
Yeah.
Outside of that, you can it's basically whatever materials you are buying as far as film posters go.
Do you get those as like a package deal from the distributor?
You can. Each distributor does it a little bit differently.
Okay.
And so you can get them as a package, or there are a couple companies where the distributors will give all their marketing materials to them and you just go to them and get it.
Okay.
Yeah. And so that, as far as I would say like discretionary variable cost goes, the film posters is probably the biggest one out of that. A couple theaters that I've reached out to said that they spend $500 to $700 a month on film posters.
Just on film posters?
Just on film posters.
Dang.
Yeah.
That's a lot. That's more money than I would have thought.
It's crazy.
Are these multiplexes or are those art house theaters?
Those are smaller theaters.
Okay.
So I can only imagine what an AMC with 20
really.
posters on the outside is spending.
Jeez, it'd be several $1,000s a month
Yeah,
just on posters.
Exactly. I think Etsy might have cut into that a little bit on the like smaller art house side, just with the number of people that sell alternative movie posters. And so, there's some flexibility in there, but for the most part, that is like a fixed top thing that we're spending money on. Obviously, like alcohol still costs money to buy, especially liquor. Beer and wine is definitely shaded towards the side of the retailer where we can get it for fairly cheap. But liquor, the sticker price for like a retailer like Specs is not very much different from somebody like me coming in just as, you know, a normal customer trying to buy it. And so that's probably what will be our biggest like food, drink cost. But to go back to the overall question, the biggest thing is rent and paying your people.
Are you the only full-time person as of right now?
Yeah, as of right now, it's just me. We will, once we're open, we'll bring on someone to run the box office and projection and then bartenders. It'll be very simple to where we'll have 2 to 3 people working in here at a time.
Okay, so it's not, it's not a big staff then?
No, not at all.
Okay, interesting. Okay, well let's switch gears for a minute. This is going to kind of lead into something that I want to end on. I'm going to play devil's advocate.
Yeah, for sure.
So we live in a very weird age with the film industry and everything. The entire exhibition side has totally changed because of streaming services.
Absolutely.
I'm sure you remember, like I do, like 10 years ago, or maybe not even 10 years ago, more like 5 or 6 years ago, everybody was like, the theaters are going to die, Netflix is going to kill us all, and not even Netflix. And now it's not just Netflix. You've got Hulu and Amazon Prime and
Disney's getting
the
ready
Disney
to
thing
launch
that's coming
around.
out. Yeah. All of these streaming services going on, all of these different ways that you can watch a movie. Why start a theater now?
I think, so my tagline that I've come up with for the theater is a modern take on your neighborhood cinema. Back when movies first started to be distributed widely, there were 1 and 2 screen cinemas all over the place, and that was where the neighborhood gathered. And even if you look around Fort Worth, there's still 10 or 12 of them that are still standing. A lot of them have been repurposed. A couple of them are just standing dilapidated. But I think that people have realized over the last few years, as streaming has become easier and easier, that it has also made them lonelier and lonelier. And I've started to see this turn in a lot of industries where people are moving away from the big box retailer that sort of blew up in the middle of the last century, because it became cheaper and it was just an easier option for a lot of people to go to a mall instead of hop around to 10 or 15 mom and pop stores. But I think that our generation and even the last 10 years is like, no, like, I want to know where my clothes are made.
It's happening with bookstores.
Yeah, exactly.
Like Barnes and Noble's on the downslope, and independent bookstores are on the rise.
Yeah, it was like Amazon came in and killed the big guys and has really enabled a lot of smaller bookstores and retailers to fill in that gap. And I think that that's something that's going to happen with film also. Obviously, like, it's awesome if you can wake up on a Saturday and just binge whatever you want for like 5 or 6 hours on your couch. But if you try and do that every single day, you are going to miss so much human interaction that you're just itching to get out and talk to people.
See, I feel like people forget that all too often, that like, movies are a communal experience.
Exactly.
There's a joy in watching a movie by yourself, like you were saying, but like, movies were made for audiences. Like, you are
Exactly.
supposed to participate. You know what I mean?
And a lot of it, especially with independent film, it's made to be discussed and appreciated. Mm-hmm. And if you are sitting on your couch watching, First Reformed, 8th grade, like, I've watched those on my couch within the last week. But
it's a different thing.
You get so much more out of it by having a group of people around you where you can say, what was this movie talking about? Mm-hmm. Like, what themes come out of this that I can take away and learn to appreciate more? Mm-hmm. And I think that that's where movie theaters are going to slide in. Obviously, like, AMC, your big box guys are going to own your superhero movies and stuff like that, which is awesome. Like, it gets people out and going to a theater, and it really keeps the idea of big time movies alive. But because of how streaming has evolved, it has made breaking into filmmaking so much easier than it's ever been before, where I can pick up my phone and film a pretty quality film. Yeah. Like, we've seen that over this past year, whether it's with like A Quiet Place, or most of Searching was shot on like GoPros.
Tangerine was on an iPhone a couple
exactly.
years ago. Yeah.
And so because of that, I think that people are learning to appreciate what good film is even more. And those people will understand what it is about going to a full theater and getting to see something on screen truly means.
Yeah.
And I think, so I get asked a similar question a lot, and it usually pertains specifically to Netflix. And what I like to say is that my Netflix subscription is not contingent on them putting out original content like Roma and The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. I think that the marginal value in those films for Netflix is minimal versus if they put those two films on wide release, they're probably pulling in between those two close to $100 million in box office. Like, realistically, with the buzz, especially that Roma has gotten, that is a huge opportunity cost for Netflix, where if Roma's only released on Netflix, like, that's not contingent on me having my Netflix account, I think that, I think Amazon does a good job of this now, where You Were Never Really Here, Manchester by the Sea, like, they put those out on wide release, and then you can go home and basically immediately watch it afterwards within like a few weeks or a month, get the chance to see it again. And I think that's a model that will probably play more towards what we see Netflix move towards, of giving more people the opportunity to see it in theaters, because that's money that Netflix can bring in that they're not right now.
We know they're in major debt right now.
Like, we know that they're raising their prices right now. And so clearly they have to figure out a way to make money.
Right.
Exclusivity of The Ballad of Buster Scruggs being on Netflix is not going to drive new users to Netflix.
Right.
But you put that in theaters and make, it's a Coen Brothers film. They're going to pull an audience. They have a very wide audience of people that are like, oh, it's the Coen Brothers, I'm in. Like, doesn't matter what it is, I'm in. And so there's an opportunity cost for them there right now that I think eventually they will have to move towards putting those things on wide release.
Yeah.
And so, long story short, I think that streaming services are awesome. They're incredible. They give great ways for people to see a lot that they wouldn't see otherwise, and they make it approachable for people to make films. But our generation especially loves to be around people. Like, we just can't handle being alone and unstimulated for too long. And so I think that we are going to see this shift it's already started in other industries, but especially in the film industry now, back towards people wanting to get out and go to film festivals, go to movie theaters, to be around a large crowd where they can engage on what they're seeing as opposed to just doing it on their couch.
Absolutely. I totally agree. I've had this thought, the mainstream of the mainstream audiences, they're probably going to shift more towards, streaming services for most things and only visit theaters for,
for the big guys.
The big franchise movies, big IP things. But there's always going to be that's the smaller audience who care about the theatrical experience and everything. I mean, this is This is you, this is me, this is people who watch my channel, and I feel like there's this role that small independent theaters like this can kind of come back to fulfill. Because they, like you were saying before, there used to be all these 1 to 2 screen theaters here in Fort Worth, and now they're all gone. There are no art house theaters here, and I feel like there's this place that theaters like that can come back and really occupy, and you don't have to have a big art house multiplex. You can just do a 1-screen neighborhood kind of theater, and it can be this great part of a community,
Yeah, and it's not worth it for big theaters to put some of these movies on their screens because of the overhead that they are having to bring in. So with their power of being larger comes the ability to show superhero movies, but with that comes the overhead to where documentaries and foreign films and independent movies don't have the maybe the buying power to get into there.
You're never going to see Roma at an AMC.
Exactly.
Right? Black and white Spanish film. That's never going to happen.
Exactly. And so we can slide in as a theater without a ton of overhead that's only trying to put 50 people in here. We're not putting on a 300 seat auditorium. And so if we find 30 people that want to see a movie that will come out on a Wednesday, Thursday night to see something, that's great for us. That's all we need. We only need 30. We don't need a few hundred.
I can't think of a better place to end. Jimmy Sweeney, thanks so much, fan.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. This video is brought to you by Squarespace. From websites and online stores to marketing tools and cutting-edge analytics, Squarespace is the best all-in-one platform out there that can help you create a unique online presence to truly stand out. That's true for all types of businesses, but even more so if you're someone like me, a freelancer working in the creative arts. If you're an actor or a filmmaker or a musician or a photographer or anything else, there's simply no better platform out there for you to showcase your work. There's nothing to install or patch or upgrade, and best of all, it's incredibly easy to use. Right now, you can go to squarespace.com/RoyalOceanFilm to save 10% off your first purchase.